Hello everybody. Today in this video I want to show you how we can include a Heltun touch panel to Fibaro gateway. Here we have HCL. I connect to the gateway locally. Actually, the gateway I'm using is new and it is not included to any account. Okay, I go to devices. Here we have a touch switch that is connected to power. By default, the backlight red indicates that the status of relay is off. When I press it, and the blue shows that the status of the relay is on. In order to include any Z-Wave devices to Fibaro here, we should click on Add or Remove Device. To add a device, it's recommended that the device and the gateway should be close to each other and their distance shouldn't exceed more than 1 meter. Here I tick this option and I press add. Now we have 30 seconds to include the device. In order to include the Heltun switch, we have to push these two buttons simultaneously for 3 seconds. As you can see, flashing red and blue indicates that the device is being included, and if the inclusion is successful, which happens now, the blue light turns on, and if the inclusion is not successful, the red light turns on. So in order to include the device to gateway, we should put the gateway into inclusion mode. Inclusion means adding the device to the gateway, and we have to touch the two buttons simultaneously for 3 seconds. Now the device is included to the gateway and it's being configured, which takes 2 to 3 minutes. This device has 2 independent inputs. Each one controls different outputs. The Heltun Smart Touch Switch has 5 outputs. 3 of them are controlled by one of the inputs, and the other remaining 2 outputs are controlled by the other inputs. each channel. Okay, here we want to use all the outputs as lighting devices. I click OK. Now I click the devices to go to the main page. Okay. Here, this device is the master of, or the parent device of the Heltun smart switch. The switch has a temperature sensor, a light sensor, and humidity sensor. All of them are working, and 10 binary switches appears. The first 5 binary switches allow us to control the state of the buttons, and the remaining 5 binary switches allow us to control and monitor the status of relays. By default, they are controlled with each other. If I click on child device number 1, device is still being configured, which needs more time, and that was the reason why it didn't act to the command. Okay, now the device is included to the gateway. Here we have the parent device. Any settings should be set in this device. The touch panel has a temperature sensor, light sensor, and humidity sensor, which they are showing their values. 10 binary switches appear when we include the device to any zwave gateway. Here we have Fibaro. And the first 5 binary switches indicates the status of buttons, each buttons. This one is for button 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the remaining 5 binary switches show the status of relays. The first thing we have to do here is go to the setting of the parent device. In advance, at the bottom of the page we have add parameters. In Fibaro we have to set parameter number 41 to 1. let's click save here to save the setting. We should do it for correct communication of the devices. When we set this parameter, as soon as we press each of the buttons and the status of the relay or button is changed, the gateway shows it. If not, it takes a while depending on how many devices you have in your network, Z-Wave network actually. Here it shows that parameter 41, the value 1 is set. If I press one of the buttons, this is button 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's press it. You see that this and these two binary switches change their status to on, and if I turn off manually, they become off. This is because of the parameter 41. If we don't set this parameter to 1, it takes time to show the change of the status. Okay, now when I click each buttons, you can see that two of the binary switches change their status. Here, number 2 and 7. When I turn off the button, when I touch the button 1, this one and this one came off, went to off. That is by default. By referring to the manual of the device, you can find out settings and the parameters. Step by step, I will go through the parameters. Parameter 1 to 5. As I mentioned earlier, for setting parameters, we have to go to the setting part of the parent device and in advanced. Bottom of the page, we have the add parameters. Okay, parameter 1 to 5. By setting these parameters, we can control the backlights of each button. If we set it to 0, the backlight is disabled. By default, it is set to 1, which is controlled by touch button. This is the reason when we touch the button and two of the binary switches changes their status. If we set these parameters 1 to 5 to 2, the backlights are controlled by gateway or associated devices. Let's try it. Okay, here parameter number 1 is related to button 1, parameter number 2 is related to button 2, and so forth. Here I insert parameter number 5, which is related to button number 5. and I set the parameter to 0. Let's save it. Here the backlight of the switch turned off. We can use this option when, for example, no loads are connected to output number 5 and we do not need it. Here, if I touch the button, the status of the relays related to this button changes, but later I will show you can turn this action off too. Okay, let's change the parameter 5 to 2. And here I click save to set the settings. In order to proceed faster, I will open another page. Okay. Parameter 5's value is set to 2. Here I touch the button, the output relay number 5 went to on, but the backlight color is not changed. I click, it becomes off, but see the backlight is red. Here, children device number 5 indicates the status of the buttons. If I click on, it becomes blue. If I click off, it becomes red. So parameter number 1 to 5 defines the backlight. Let's set it to 0. And click save. As soon as I click save, the red button turns off. Okay, the other option, parameters 6 to 10. They defines which buttons control which relays. By default, button 1 controls output 1, button 2 controls output 2, which means relay 2, and so forth. But we can change it in any way we can. And also, we can control all the outputs with just 1 or 2 buttons. As an example, parameter number 6 is related to output 1, parameter number 7 is related to output 2, and parameter number 8 is related to output 3. Parameter number 9 is related to output 4, and parameter number 10 is related to output 5. I decide to use parameter number, let's say 8, which controls which is related to output number 3. By default, it is parameter number 8 is set to 3 because button number 3 is controlling this output. Here I change it to 1 and save it. You heard the beep sound? That was because button number 1 was on and immediately the status of relay 3 changes to on. Here we have output 1, output 2. Both of them became off. By this parameter, I'm controlling output 1 and output 3 just by button number 1. There. They work together. Pay attention to what's happening here. If I click on device number 6, child device number 6, if I turn it to on, simultaneously the output relay number 3, which its related binary switch is 8, changes its status. If I click on off, it becomes off. But the opposite does not work. Here number 6 remained off, and that's because of the settings. Here we have changed the default settings, so binary switch number 3 is controlling the button of number 3. When I click on off, it becomes red. When I click on, it becomes blue. And if I touch it, it becomes off here. And now with this button we can run scenes, use it as scenarios. For example, if I turn it on, all the lights goes to on, and if I turn it off, all the lights go to off. So that was parameter numbers 6 to 10, and I will change it to its default, which is 3. Next option that this device offers is controlling the click of each touch. button. Parameters 11 to 15 are related to these settings. Again, parameter 11 is related to output 1, 12 is related to output 2, and so forth. What do these parameters do? Here, parameter 5, we do not need it. We can delete it or we can change it. I have turned off the backlight of touch button number 5. Here I want to disable the output. This works, this controls output relay 5, but I want to disable it. So parameter 15 is related to this button. 0 means disabled. I save this parameter. Okay, here if I touch this button, nothing happens because it is disabled. We can set this whenever we have, for example, we can set these parameters whenever we have, for example, 4 devices or loads connected to this switch. This was an example of that. Okay. By default, parameters 11 to 15 are set to 1, which means by pressing the button, the relay inverts the state. If it's on, it goes to off, and off to on, like a toggle switch. Regarding touch button state, here the parameter is set to to 1. If I click or touch the button, the output, the status of output, and the backlight, the color of the backlight is changed. Let's control button number 2. The related parameter is 12. By default it is 2, it is 1, and I will set it to 2. What happens here is that check it again. I touch the button. Both of the binary switches went to on. If we set this parameter to 3, just pressing the button makes the relay goes to on only. If we set this parameter to 4, pressing the button and the relay goes to off only. If we set this parameter to 5, timer mode is activated. Pressing the button and the relay output goes to the on state, and after the time is the specified time, after the specified time is passed, the relay goes to off. And parameter number no. Okay, parameters number 11 to 15 defines the click mode of each button. Let's add a parameter here. I want to change the click mode of touch button number 5, so its parameter is 15. By default it is set to 1, which means pressing the button and the relay inverts the state on to off, off to on, like a toggle switch. If I set it to 0, it is disabled. Here, if I click the button or touch the button, nothing happens. So parameters number 1 to 5 and 11 to 15 are used when one of the buttons and the outputs are useless. I mean that no loads are connected to them and the button does not run any scenario. Okay. If we change this parameter to 3, touching the button only turns the relay on. If we set this parameter to 4, press the button and the relay goes to only off. And if we set this parameter to 5, I mean 11 to 14, which each of them is related to one of the buttons, here if we set it to 5, when we click or touch the button, the output relays goes to on, and after a specified time which is defined in parameters 21 to 24 related to each button, the relay goes back to off. And if we set this parameter to 6, the opposite, the inverse of what happens when we set it to 5. So when it's set to 5, by touching the button, the relay goes to on, and after the specified time it goes to off. And if this parameter is set to 6, by touching the button, the related relay goes to off, and after passing the specified time it goes to on, and by default this is 1. Okay, parameters 16 to 20 define the hold action of each buttons. Here in parent device, I click or I touch button 1. Here it shows that button 1 is clicked. If I hold the touch button number 1, here shows that number 1 is held, and when I release it, it shows it. If we set parameter 16 to 20 to 0, this holding function is disabled. By default, this is set to 1, which acts as touching the button, whether I touch it or hold it. And 2 and 3 defines the other ways which you can read them in its manual. Parameters 26 to 13, we can define the power consumption of the connected device to each relay, and the gateway or the device shows that how many watts this connected load has used. And here we can see that in parent device is shown. Okay, the brightness of the backlight is controllable, and their settings are related to parameters 31 and 32. By default, parameter 31 and 32 are set to 0, which means the brightness of backcolor is controlled by this light sensor automatically. If we set them to 1, the brightness will goes to its minimum, and 3 is the maximum. Parameter number 31 is related to red and 32 is related to blue. So it's better to change both of them. 31 and 32 by default it is set to 0, which means that the brightness of the backlight is controlled automatically by this light sensor. Let's set them to 1. They went to their minimum brightness. Let's set them to 2. This is the middle, and 3 is the maximum brightness. As soon as I click saved, if you have paid attention to the backlight colors, you would have seen the changes. Okay, let's set them to 0 and save. Another important parameter that I think should be discussed is parameter 37. 37 by default is set to 1, which means blue light or blue color indicates the on status and red indicates off. And if we change it to 0, red indicates on and blue indicates off. And parameter number 38 is used for calibrating temperature sensor. In order to exclude the device from the gateway, we have to put the gateway in exclusion mode. In parentheses, exclusion means removing the device from the gateway or the zwave network. Here we go to add or remove device. On the bottom of the page, we click delete. When the counter starts, we have to touch the two button touch switches simultaneously for 3 seconds. Red indicates that exclusion is successful. If blue turns on, it means that we need to repeat this procedure again. Now the device is excluded from the gateway. And in order to factory reset this device, we have to press simultaneously these two buttons and center button simultaneously for 5 seconds. It's resetted to factory default. I hope this video fulfills you. Have a good day.